This video is on files 3.1 and 3.2. Chapter 3 is about phonology. As you studied phonetics for the last 2 weeks, you now know that phonetics is the study of individual sounds in a language. It studies the production, the physical structures, as well as the perception of individual sounds in a language. Phonology is different. It is the study of how sounds are organized within a language and how they interact with each other. File 3.1 is about phonotactic constraints in a language. Here I want to take a look at phonotactic constraints of the English language and to provide you with a few examples. Phonotactic constraints of English include several specific constraints. First, all syllables in English consist of vowels and consonants. We already know this. Second, a syllable can be split into an onside and a rhyme, and the rhyme usually contains nucleus and coda, such as this. For the word strand, you have an onside of 3 consonants cluster st, st, and r, and you have a nucleus, which is the ash, a, and then you have the coda n, and the for strand. Third, a third constraint of the English language is a syllable may not have an onside, may not have a coda, but it must have a nucleus. For example, the word I, we don't have an onside or a coda, but we only have the nucleus, which is the vowel sound. 4. English does not allow the edge and ing in the onside position, and it does not allow as represented by the lowercase h in the coda position. And lastly, English allows consonant clusters in onside and coda positions, but they are highly restricted. You have the examples in our textbook as well. On page 109, you can see several words that start with 2 consonant clusters. These 2 consonant clusters in onset positions are usually formed of a stop or a fricative, being followed by a nasal, liquid, or a glide. On page 109, you can see examples of words such as a fricative s followed by a glide w, like sweet. You can also see examples like a stop, like b, and a liquid, such as r, bring. Okay, and you can look at the other examples on page 109. The second situation of this is that you can have 3 consonant clusters in onside positions, but usually the first one is s. The second sound is a voiceless stop, such as p, t, or k, and the third is a liquid or a glide, such as l, r, y, or w. For example, in the word spring, you have sp and r to start the onset as a 3 consonant cluster, and in splash, you have the sp, l sounds as the 3 consonant cluster. And so it's possible, but it's highly restricted. And the third situation is that in codas, nasals may precede voiceless stops, but only if they share the same place of articulation, and they are usually in file 3.3, you are going to see that they are assimilated sounds, such as jump. The bilabial nasal and the bilabial stop both share the place of articulation because they are both bilabial consonants. I'm at this point, number 4. Sometimes you do see that a sound sequence is prohibited in a language. However, it still occurs in some of the words or some of the speaking. For example, if a word is borrowed from another language, then in the original language, if that's possible, then it's also possible that it would occur into the borrowed language. For example, the word tsunami is a borrowed word from Japanese into English, and you see that it starts with the t consonant cluster. However, in native English language, you don't see this consonant cluster as possible. Later, we'll talk about how native speakers of English deal with this because it's not a possible sound combination at the beginning of a word. Second is that in English, you normally do not see a 3-consonant cluster occurring in speech. However, if in spoken language, two words are spoken really fast, you can see that these two words are put together sequentially. For example, next door, you actually have a 5-consonant cluster, right? But these are actually two words instead of a single word. And so it is possible, although it is possible to have a 5-consonant cluster, it's usually not within the same, it's not usually within one word, but it may be in a sequence of speech. Okay? And languages have many ways to resolve constraint violations. For example, ghosts, STS becomes ghosts. And when the Japanese words, for example, tsunami, is borrowed into English because t and s cluster is not possible in native English language. And so usually speakers of the language would drop the initial consonant and only leave tsunami instead of pronouncing it as tsunami, which is very difficult for the native speaker of the language. A second way to deal with resolving constraint violations would be to insert a vowel between two consonants. For example, Japanese is a language that does not allow consonant clusters. All consonant clusters have to be broken into consonant, and vowel sequences. And so when English words are borrowed into Japanese, they have to insert vowels between two consonant cluster, like birthday becomes busday. And another example would be for the English word McDonald's. And here is a YouTube link for how Japanese people pronounce the word McDonald's.
Hi, what's up? I'm talking about hamburger restaurant today. Hamburger is so popular in Japan. Number 1 hamburger restaurant is this. This restaurant is so popular in the world, I think. But this restaurant name is very difficult for Japanese. So this company's Japanese official name is McDonald's. McDonald's. I know this is so funny, for English people. English name is like McDonald's, right? This one. I don't know my pronunciation is good or bad. This is so difficult for Japanese. If your friend said McDonald, please understand it means McDonald's.
Okay, as the video shows, McDonald's is pronounced as Makudo in Japanese, just as birthday is pronounced as birthday, and control is pronounced as contrololo in Japanese. Example of English is that two stops cannot come at the beginning of words, nor can a stop plus a nasal combination. So words like this, I can't really pronounce the word as it was originally. When words like this is borrowed into English, a schwa is usually inserted between a consonant cluster, so it's pronounced like knish. Okay, a third way for languages to deal with constraints in the language is to use assimilation rule. For example, there is a constraint in terms of voicing in English. If a voiced consonant follows a voiceless consonant, usually the voiced consonant would also become voiceless. So instead of saying walk, the native speaker would say walked. Okay. So the voiced consonant the becomes the voiceless consonant t. Our textbook also introduces examples from American Sign Language to show that because it is also a language, it has constraints as well. The three main constraints for American Sign Language include a monosyllabic sign cannot consist of just one hand shape, one location, or one orientation. At least one of the elements is required to change. The second constraint is on changes of hand shape. It basically says if the sign involves movement of the hand and a change in hand shape, then the change of hand shape must take place during the movement, not before, not after the movement. And you can see the example for the sign, white. This is from the files link page that accompanies our textbook. Okay, as you can see, the sign changes shape during the movement, not before or not after it. Okay, and the third constraint is the symmetry constraint. That is, in a two-handed sign, if both hands are moving, then the non-dominant hand must have the same hand shape, orientation, and motion as the dominant hand, such as the sun can. Okay. However, it is possible for the non-dominant hand to stay stationary while the dominant hand moves, as in the example chocolate. Okay. As you can see, American Sign Language also has constraints in terms of its pronunciation, okay, as shown in hand shape. Then the concept of foreign accents. Where do foreign accents come from? It usually is because of the phonotactic constraints of one language while speaking another. Okay, for example, native Spanish speakers, when they try to say English words with consonant clusters st, sk, sp at the beginning of words, because Spanish does not allow the consonant clusters in the beginning of their words, and so they have difficulty in saying these words in English. And so they have to add a vowel sound before the consonant cluster to make the pronunciation easier or possible. And so student becomes a student. My son's name is Skylar, and we met a native Spanish speaker at the playground, and she asked his name. And I told her his name is Skylar, but again, it starts with sk. And so she had great difficulty saying his name. And so she said, or she repeated, Skylar. Okay. Another reason or source of foreign accent is differences in different languages' phonetic inventories. For example, the theta and the as are pretty unique to the English language, and many other languages don't have these two sounds. Chinese is one language that does not have these two sounds. And so when a native Chinese speaker is learning to speak English words, they often have to substitute these sounds with sounds that are similar. And so this becomes this, and thin becomes thin. I have been learning English myself for more than 20 years, and sometimes these two sounds still trip me, and I still have difficulties with these two sounds if I'm not careful enough. And so that shows how difficult it is if the person's original language does not have the same phonetic inventory. Okay, and this video is really interesting to watch. I highly recommend it. It's only in a couple minutes, and so but it definitely shows this particular example of the theta and as sounds in a language. Okay. File 3.2 is on phonemes and allophones. A phoneme is the abstract psychological representation of a set of speech sounds that are variants of the same sound. An allophone, the definition of that is in relevance to the definition of phoneme. An allophone is each member of a particular phoneme set is called an allophone. Okay, so if we take the English language as an example, the t sound is a phoneme because it has several different realizations in different words or in different environments. Okay, that includes the aspirated t with a puff of air coming out when you are speaking the sound. That is when t is at the beginning of a syllable. And you have the unaspirated sound, and this usually comes in a consonant cluster when it's not the initial consonant. You also have the flap little, and you have the glottal stop in kitten. Nonetheless, English speakers will recognize them as the t sound. And so the abstract representation of all of the t sounds collected is the phoneme, and each of the individual aspirated t and aspirated t, the flap and the glottal stop, are all allophones of the phoneme t. Okay, as you can see from this particular illustration, this is on page 117 of our textbook. Okay. To identify phonemes and allophones, we look at the distribution of speech sounds. There are three typical distributions of a phone. They are contrastive distribution, complementary distribution, and free variation. Okay. Contrastive distribution is the case in which the two sounds occur in the same phonetic environment. And using one rather than the other would change the meaning of the word. Okay, so this is really important. For example, in the two words leaf and riff, the only difference is in the onset consonant. Leaf is written as L-E-A-F and riff is written as R-E-E-F. Okay, leaf and riff, the only difference in these two words, in these two sounds, is the onset consonant. One is L, the other one is R. Okay, when we use one instead of the other, the meaning changes. Okay, thus we say L and R are in contrastive distribution. And the same is for T and D sounds in bit and bid. And here is the concept of a minimal pair. A minimal pair is the pair of words that we use to find the contrastive distribution, such as leaf and riff. And so leaf and riff is called a minimal pair. Okay. Similarly, bit and bid is called a minimal pair. Another type of distribution is complementary distribution. Sounds that are in complementary distribution, they do not occur in the same phonetic environment. Instead, their distribution complements each other. That means for the sounds that are in complementary distribution, if you replace one sound with another, the meaning does not change, but they would occur in specific phonetic environments. For example, if T occurs in the beginning of a stressed syllable, then it's aspirated, such as in top, tall, tip, tell. Okay. Again, aspirated sounds are the ones that are pronounced with a puff of air coming out of the vocal tract. And if it occurs within a consonant cluster, st, then it is unaspirated. Okay. And so we know that the aspirated t and the unaspirated t are in complementary distribution because they only occur in their specific phonetic environment. But using one instead of the other does not change the meaning. For example, instead of saying stop, if you say stop, then it sounds weird, okay, to a native speaker of the language, but the meaning of it does not change as if you change from t to the, as in bit and bid. Okay, so that's the difference between contrastive and complementary distribution. Last, there is free variation. Most phonological distributions can be described as either contrastive or complementary. In some contexts, however, more than one pronunciation of a given sound is possible without changing the meaning of the word. And you see examples of that on page 120 of our textbook. In these cases, we may not be able to predict exactly which sound would occur, but the choice does not affect the meaning of the word. And so that's why they are called free variation. Okay, those are the key points from files 3.1 and 3.2. If you have questions, feel free to contact me either by email or text messaging.